This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, and Bloomberg Originals.
We have liftoff for the SpaceX IPO, history being made on Wall Street. Shares of SpaceX, yes, indeed, began trading at $150 a share to a crowd at the Nasdaq market site in Times Square. Tim, the stock now up about 28%, raised $75 billion, and it made Elon Musk a pretty rich dude.
Yeah, the first trillionaire in history, gives this company now a market cap of about $2.27 trillion, making it one of the biggest companies out there. It is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, a special edition. I'm Tim Stenovec, along with Carol Massar, coming to you live from Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York. And Carol, we've got a great group with us for the next 4 hours.
An amazing team has been tracking all of the ticks and all of the stories leading up to this massive historical IPO. We're talking about Bloomberg Tech host Ed Ludlow here in studio with us. So too is Bailey Lipschultz, his Bloomberg News IPO reporter. And then Bloomberg News TV reporter Yahaira Anand. She is out there at the Nasdaq market site. So as we said, we've got full team coverage. We're going to be leaning on all of the expertise of Bloomberg News across our newsroom to really look at what is a very complicated company. There are a lot of moving parts when it comes to this, Tim.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say a lot of questions about what the company would do on its first day of trading. The idea of a close to $30 trillion total addressable market, Carol, that was the story that was sold ahead of this IPO, and it looks like investors today are buying it.
We're going to go to Yahaira in just a moment, but I want to just really quickly bring in Bailey and Ed just for a quick comment. I mean, it's about an IPO. It's about a specific company, lots of moving parts, and an individual that has really captivated and dominated our world for over a decade. He's now really, really rich by a lot in terms of billionaires, trillionaires, the first one. Ed, top of mind for you right here.
Yeah, as unprecedented as it is, the biggest IPO in history, the volume of cash raised. What is remarkable is how foretold this all was. It's all happened exactly as we reported and described. And it is super interesting that the stock is at $172.50 right now. Mm-hmm. You know, on a fully diluted basis, you're kind of heading toward $2.4 trillion. But there's nothing crazy here. It's taking time, and it will take a lot of time for people to really digest the future this company's presented in terms of its valuation and trading.
What did I hear? Well, you know, people talk about valuations. It's trading, SpaceX is trading on Cosmos, or a Cosmos valuation of some sort.
Price to Cosmos ratio.
Thank you.
Yeah, better than community adjusted EBITDA throwback from many years ago. Bailey Lipschultz, along with Ed Ludlow, you've covered your fair share of IPOs. Today's first day of trading, kind of best case scenario for how things are going. Seems to be going off without a hitch.
No, everything's going off without a hitch. I was talking to folks on the buy side who were kind of penciling in, 10% would be a good open. Mm-hmm. We opened at 11% right now. As you guys have mentioned, near 30% up. There has been, as far as I know, other than a little bit of Robinhood snags, no real breakage as it relates to the plumbing, no issues with opening the stock, similar to what we saw with Facebook. Again, 300 million shares trading right now. The float, 555 million. Keeping an eye on that just typically because with these massive IPOs with retail allocation, we expect to see, quote unquote, the full float trading in day one.
All right, guys, sit tight. We're going to continue this. Of course, SpaceX IPO. Thousands of SpaceX employees helped ring in the company's public debut in both Texas and New York. It is the first time a company has done a dual opening bell ceremony for an IPO, according to a spokesperson for the Nasdaq. And that's exactly where we find Bloomberg News, Yahaira Anand. She is at the Nasdaq market site in Times Square. Walk us through the open and what you've been hearing and seeing.
Well, the excitement and relief here at the Nasdaq is palpable because, as Bailey was saying, this has gone off without a hitch, with SpaceX opening just over 2 hours after the opening bell. And now we are seeing a company that is public at around $2.2 trillion. That is more than the likes of, that is more valuable than the likes of Meta, Tesla, and even Saudi Aramco. And the strong debut, of course, isn't entirely surprising given the enormous demand we saw ahead of the offering from both the retail and institutional side, with the deal heavily oversubscribed. And speaking of retail investors, speaking of Elon fans, it was funny to see the crowds gathering outside, the paparazzi gathering outside, waiting to maybe catch a glimpse of Elon Musk. But as you said, he was not here. He was over at Starbase in Texas. So that was quite funny to see. But you could see the excitement here, especially from the investors who have been with this company from the start, or the president, the CFO of SpaceX, who were here on the floor, excited to get this thing going.
All right, Yahaira, thank you so much. Yahaira Anand there at the Nasdaq market site, tracking the stock. SpaceX again, 174.69. It's moving fast, up almost up almost 30% here in the trade. Hey, one thing we wanted to point out, and we want to continue with our all-team coverage here. Elon Musk earlier this morning in a live stream on another one of his platforms and companies, we are talking about X. Here's what he had to say.
There are always problems on Earth. There are always problems on Earth. There are always things that we wish to be better, that we want to solve here on Earth, and we should solve them. But there also have to be things that get you excited about the future, that make you glad to wake up in the morning because you can't wait to see what happens next. And that's the future that SpaceX wants to bring to you.
All right, that, of course, was Elon Musk on a live stream on X this morning. Felt kind of spacey there, Tim Stenovec.
It did. It also felt very familiar if you've read the S1 for SpaceX. It felt like I was, reading that all over again. This is the messaging that Elon and company want to get across, that waking up in the morning, you can't wait to see what happens next, the future that SpaceX wants to bring to you.
All right, guys, so let's bring back Bailey Lipschultz and Ed Ludlow, of course, Bloomberg News IPO reporter Bailey Lipschultz and host of Bloomberg Tech on Bloomberg Television, Ed Ludlow. I mean, is this all about the future, Ed? The valuation of this. We have talked so much about the valuation of the SpaceX company now, and is it all about future expectations, which is often what you do when you kind of buy into Elon and his story and his companies?
Yeah, what investors have had to understand is an already quite diverse business that has lots of different arms, and then over a very distant timeline, things happening in a different order. So SpaceX still has a sort of guiding mission of making humankind a multi-planetary species. One thing I would note, and again, all we can do is go back and read the documents. It's stated in black and white. But part of Mr. Musk's compensation package is literally tied to the goal of establishing a human colony on Mars. And so he doesn't really fully realize his stock-based comp without achieving that goal. Let's for a second give some sympathy to the Business Week listeners somewhere around the world that is hearing that for the first time.
Yeah.
The problem is that, okay, so SpaceX wants to put humankind on Mars and actually in the interim on the moon. It's all laid out for investors, but the business in the future has nothing to do with that.
Well, what I want to ask you, and Bailey, come on in on this when we go to valuation. Let's say Elon doesn't do that, but is SpaceX really largely an AI company going forward? And is it about what he does with data centers and space and so on and so forth when it comes to the valuation and kind of growing into it?
Well, I think Ed and I were one of the first, if not the first, to really call out the fact that SpaceX pitched the $26.5 trillion AI story. So that's terrestrial data centers, that's orbital data centers, that's potentially making Grok a real rival to Claude and ChatGPT. Pretty pie in the sky ambitions. Again, it's really, when I talk to some critics, they say, well, you can't disprove a $26.5 trillion TAM because, I don't know, you say it's real, everyone else kind of buys into it. But that's the vision. I think when you talk to investors and people who are Musk believers, Mars, this idea that they're going to be the Union Pacific of space and comparing Mars to California is a big part of that pitch, but the actual dollars and cents in the interim will come from the ability to provide compute via these orbital data centers.
One thing I like about California is you can just go outside and enjoy it without wearing a spacesuit, but that's neither here nor there. Ed, I'm going to go back to this over and over again, which is what we know about 2025 revenue from SpaceX, the segments, the reporting segments. Yeah. This is what we're going to be watching in the future. And remind everybody, space, about 22% of 2025 revenue. Connectivity, which of course includes Starlink, about 61%, and then 17% is AI. In terms of the growth opportunities in those three segments, which is the one that investors are most bullish on?
Yeah, in the immediate term, they are most bullish on something that's quite recent, which is SpaceX AI. Remember, SpaceX owns XAI.
As of early 2026.
Very quickly pivoting itself to be a neocloud. In other words, renting the compute capacity on Earth, a data center that's terrestrial in nature, to Anthropic and Google. Anthropic agreed to pay $1.25 billion per month.
It's a lot of money.
Google more than $900 million per month. Musk has made a big deal on the socials about these being short term. They can pull the plug after 90 days. But, the investors are like, wow, that's so smart.
And it's also real money in the very near future.
You make
it's
a really
real accounts receivables, right?
Again, this is so difficult. I think the shares now are at a 30% gain.
Yeah.
I don't have the ticker in front of me.
Yeah, 30% higher.
People say, okay, right. So you guys are telling us that in the future you're going to make all this money from data centers in space, and what that means in practice is a very, very big satellite where the solar arrays are just ginormous. But actually, in the 2025 financials is buried some of the answer. Connectivity, which is the bucket for Starlink, is basically cash flow positive. It's a cash generating business. SpaceX has thousands of Starlink satellites in deployment around the Earth. And so what the existing investors do is extrapolate out and say, I can see them doing that with data centers.
I think it's also something that's really tangible for a lot of people who've experienced SpaceX. I mean, I've noticed advertising on United flights, United regional jets now having Starlink. They're trying to roll it out across the entire fleet. It's a pretty incredible product that a lot of people have had access to, unlike something like actually experiencing a launch.
Yeah, I mean, I don't own a rocket yet, but
you do have Starlink.
But I do have Starlink, and it is a pretty incredible product. And we increasingly see it. If you jump on an airplane, you're increasingly seeing it kind of spread out in terms of kind of more normal, should I say, usage. What's interesting is Tom Keene and Scarlet Food just had Jim Chanos, noted bear, noted skeptic, talking about among the Elon universe, because he's pretty skeptical about most of it, it sounds like. But he talked about Starlink being a real business worth a couple of hundreds of billions of dollars. So, so the bet today is on that, or like what?
So just really quick, and I'll keep it really short. It's interesting that Chanos acknowledges the merits of that business. The issue is that in this IPO process is that the prospectus set out a total addressable market of 28.5 trillion, and Starlink and the launch business combined was only 2 trillion of that.
And even Ed, when we look through the notes from the sell side analysts, again, not publicly published for the most part, circulated with investors, the pitch is the fact that they're going to throw off hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue from AI. The ability potentially to hit $1 trillion in sales, according to Evercore ISI, at just after the end of the decade, is predicated on artificial intelligence. And when you think about it, Starlink is a terrific business. It's a great business. But the multiples, if you looked at a Verizon or an AT&T or a true competitor, are not what the AI vision would be.
What are they making off of XAI right now?
Well, there is a big disconnect here, which I'm staring at my screen. I might be able to answer at some point in the next 4 hours. But if XAI is going to sell all of this AI software to other companies on planet Earth, why would they rent out all the compute capacity that they built to Anthropic and Google? Why aren't they using that capacity to train more of their own models? Or is it a signal that people aren't using the models? They're not being run on the inference side. We don't really have an answer from that, but that is what the bear would say. They would interpret that signal as, yes, okay, that's a pretty profitable business potentially on paper, but what does it tell us about how much progress XAI is making with selling its software?
That's a good question, right?
That's a very near-term headache that people go back and forth on.
Bailey, over the next few months, we're going to be sort of glued to different analysts who come out and say that they've initiated coverage and what their coverage looks like. Just in terms of chatter on the street among analysts, is there a general consensus, a general view? And again, every bank pretty much was involved in this, so there's sort of a challenge in dissecting what the banks who were involved with versus what their analysts are saying. But is there any consensus there?
We'll get initiations from the banks that underwrote this deal in 25 calendar days. So that's when we'll get the view. When you look at Oppenheimer initiating, I think they had a $190 price target. Again, that's 12 months from now, and we're currently trading at 171, so take that with a grain of salt. I think the big debate when you just look at the analyst community is Tesla is the most hotly debated stock. from the sell side. 30 buys, 24 holds. A hold is essentially a sell.
Yeah.
Let's call it what it is. And 9 sell ratings, which is telling clients actively short this stock. So when you're looking at an investment community that hasn't bought into the Tesla vision, and the parallels are pretty darn stark in that it's bet on Elon and it's bet on futuristic technologies toward the end of the decade, if not a decade out, it's going to be fascinating to see what the reception is on that perspective.
And maybe it gets us to a discussion point, and we'll be revisiting this in the next few hours with you, about a potential Tesla tie-up with SpaceX. Yeah. This has been bandied about for months at this point.
So the idea that SpaceX would merge with Tesla has been around for some time. People still believe that that will be the case to different degrees. Some see it as being completely imminent. Others see it as being something that might happen in 2027, 2028. Tesla and SpaceX have never said anything publicly about it, right? This is all based on the thesis of some investors that have spoken publicly. But also, when SpaceX merged with XAI, the Friday before that was confirmed, we had reported that it looked like SpaceX was going to merge with XAI, but they had looked at multiple options, and one was a discussion between SpaceX and Tesla, company to company, about what that merger would look like. And also in that, some detail that some SpaceX investors basically went to Elon, those that had access to him, and said, wouldn't it be a better idea for SpaceX to merge with Tesla rather than XAI? XAI had a lot of debt. It was burning cash. Tesla and SpaceX are hardware companies. They're more analogous on vertical integration. In the end, it's academic. SpaceX merged with XAI and then it went public in the biggest IPO in history. But it won't go away, that idea. The thing is, we just don't know.
Well, I do want to call out that in an earlier interview on CBC, when Shotwell did say that it would make Elon's life easier, just reading from the transcript, saying, quote, there's no question that there's synergies between Tesla and SpaceX in our futures. Definitely, there's a convergence of kind of what we're all trying to accomplish in the future. That's an acknowledgement that it is a possibility and that it does make sense.
It does also exist with Terafab, which we can get to later in the hours we have together, but yeah.
Synergies, but it's also you've got companies that are buying stuff from each other and creates kind of a demand automatically for various Elon products.
Well, even when you think about the fact that a big part of the pitch, Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, for Tesla is Optimus, and when you talk to people who are buying into the 2040, 2045 vision, why wouldn't you use robots on Mars to build out the infrastructure for
one more immediate answer, rather than getting to Mars, is that those satellites in orbit that are data centers, they have GPUs on board. When you're running inference, you're running the models, at the edge. Actually, Optimus and the robotaxi business of Tesla, there is localized compute in the brain, so to speak, of the humanoid robot. There's a chip. But there is still some element of cloud computing that's needed when you run an AI model at that scale. That would be a good first customer for Starlink. For SpaceX.
But I'm glad you brought up Starlink, because how are these entities all going to communicate with one another?
Right.
Connectivity.
Exactly. And also 1 million robots on Mars. Is that hitting the goal of 1 million people on Mars?
Carol, you're opening up a real can of worms.
I am.
They are not people.
Yet.
Right.
Score. Hey, listen, folks, if you're just joining us, I'm Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovec, Ed Ludlow, Bailey Lipschultz. We are talking on a historic market day, no doubt about it. Shares of SpaceX climbing in their first day of trading, company making history with a $75 billion IPO, sold for $150 in its opening trade. Right now, the stock, it's gone up as much as 30% in this first day of trading. Right now, we're looking at a share price of $173.97 a share. That means good for a gain of just shy of 29%. And Elon, go buy dinner for your family, because you're a trillionaire now. I'm just going to put it out. We continue with all hands on deck. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovec, Ed Ludlow, Bailey Lipschultz, and this is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, a special edition, the SpaceX IPO.
It's 1:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Best level of the day right now on SpaceX, just about at 28% higher after its IPO this morning. 172.37 where we stand. We had liftoff at roughly 11:47 this morning. SpaceX surging in its first day out after Elon Musk's company made history with that $75 billion IPO that instantly turned it into one of the world's biggest companies. Right now, again, we've got SpaceX surging, SpaceX up by 27%. The U.S. stock market pushing higher with the Dow, the S&P, and Nasdaq all advancing. Hopes for a diplomatic breakthrough lifting stocks. S&P up 44 to 74.38. That is a gain now of 0.6%. Dow Industrials up 431, up by about 0.8%. Nasdaq up 128, now up by 0.5%. The Nasdaq 100 index up 0.9%. Small cap shares doing even better. The Russell 2000 index up by 1.2%. All of this with the SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index up 2.5%. The VIX right around 18 now, and a 10-year 4.47%. The 2-year 4.07%. The 30-year 4.96%. Gold up 0.2%, 42.22 the ounce, while West Texas Intermediate crude below 85 a barrel, down 3.3%. Brent 87.31, down by 3.4%. The big story we continue to cover, the SpaceX IPO. SpaceX up now by 27.7%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, gotcha, Charlie. Thank you so much. Carol Massar, along with Tim Stenovec, and of course, Bloomberg tech host Ed Ludlow. You got to love it on a day when you look at the most read stories on the Bloomberg terminal in the past 8 hours, and 6 of 10 somehow are either about SpaceX are related to SpaceX. There's also a story about Nixon 5 crashing New York City weddings this weekend. So I'm just giving you an idea of what everybody's reading on the Bloomberg this Friday.
Well, I think I'm guilty as charged for reading a lot about SpaceX today. Shares, as we heard from Charlie just now, up 28%. They were up as much as go ahead and call it 30.8% earlier in the session. They did open today 11% higher than that IPO price yesterday. Looking at volume, it is a lot of shares are trading hands. About 336 million, according to the latest instant count on the Bloomberg terminal.
Yeah, it's pretty historic and fun to watch. But it feels like very orderly and kind of mellow, we were just saying. Hey, we want to get to a trusted and thoughtful voice on all things Elon Musk and his universe. Max Chafkin is with us. He's Bloomberg Businessweek columnist. He's host of Everybody's Business podcast here at Bloomberg, author of The Contrarian, Peter Thiel, and The Rise of the Silicon Valley Oligarchs. He's here in studio along with me and Tim, and of course, the host of Bloomberg Tech, Ed Ludlow. Max. Hey. So how are you thinking about this? You wrote a story back in April, and I think the headline on it was that SpaceX's IPO is Elon Musk's most audacious product launch yet.
Yeah, I mean, I've been spending some of today thinking about the last Elon Musk IPO back in 2010, and you think about then, it was at not a super high valuation. The economy was not great. There were relatively, I'd say, low expectations around that company, and also Elon Musk was incredibly popular, right? He didn't have this kind of political thing where you have a lot of people who are suddenly really mad at him, really mad at his companies, mad at data centers and so on. So I think in a lot of ways, SpaceX is going into this market that while it's very inflated, it's hard to see how much room there is to grow.
But it does seem like, Max, that in recent weeks and months, the chatter around Elon's political actions over the last couple of years, his relationship with the president, that has not really been the focus of the way that people are thinking about this IPO. And in fact, it doesn't seem like it's come up much in the coverage. Certainly there were some protests outside the Nasdaq today, or I should say some signage outside the Nasdaq today. But I don't know how else to describe it. Yeah, okay. Well, how would you describe it?
It was an effigy, maybe?
Effigy, okay.
Is that the word? I think he is still very much involved, in our politics. He's when you look at the lists of donors for 2026, he's pretty high up there. He and Trump, of course, are back together. Their friendship is back on. SpaceX just won a couple of big contracts related to the Golden Dome. I think what's happened is that the AI story has basically swamped everything else. And that's especially true when we're talking about the sort of financial side and Wall Street and everything. I mean, the bankers who have been pushing this are certainly not pitching Elon Musk's connection to the Trump administration. At least I wouldn't think explicitly. And
it wasn't in the S1, was it?
The AI story is
well, risk factors, right? Political.
Well,
sorry. Yeah.
Well, no. I mean, the main issue in the risk factors, right? I'm just recounting is that it also spells out as clear as day that the entire success of the plan is dependent on Elon Musk leading it, right? You know, that it says if he were to go away, that would be it. And that in the last, you know, Max and I have
That's
sort
a
of
big
been...
risk.
It's so weird. I'm like thinking back, was it even 2024 that we wrote it, or was 2025?
24, I believe.
Everyone's just trying to make sense of like, okay, what was it that Elon Musk was trying to achieve by aligning himself in that political bucket, even outside of the president? You know, people ask me all the time at the moment, I mean, literally this week, well, is there anything about SpaceX going public in the President Trump's term? Don't know the answer. You know,
I think I asked you, like, would we be having a SpaceX IPO if President Trump...
Not at $2 trillion. I mean, I think so much of the run-up in the AI market has to do with the White House's, for better or worse, the White House's policy on AI, which has essentially been let them cook. You know, let's rip out all the regulations. Let's get data centers going as quickly as we can, and so on. And so much of that is kind of baked in to the SpaceX pitch. I also think, as I said, you know, the S1 says that U.S. federal contracts are about 20% of SpaceX's revenue. That's down. It's falling.
Yeah.
But that's still a significant amount of money. And as I said, they are getting more contracts. As much as this is kind of a sideline for SpaceX at this point, because the future is Starlink, the future is data centers in space and Grok and all that stuff. The present very much is government contracts, and they have done well during this period. I think we're talking about Elon Musk being a trillionaire. You know, I'm not sure that he's a trillionaire if he doesn't have that political adventure that he had, you know, in 2024 and 2025.
The one thing I would observe, right, is that we keep forgetting about what is SpaceX on the hook for. SpaceX and Starship are a massive part of America's ambition to get back to the moon. In fact, they are literally now on the hook to make Starship work in a certain time frame, where they're required to demo that this year. And that's so fascinating because that isn't codified in the prospectus. It's not even discussed.
How are they doing with respect to Starship?
Well, they've just done the 12th test flight and the 12th sort of mission, I suppose, where it carried no payload of any significance. It was a dummy, but it was with a brand new architecture. Basically, top to tail, they re-engineered it. And I think what Gwynne Shotwell, the president and COO, has been saying this morning is that in the coming weeks, they'll do 13 and 14. The whole point of it is the economics work because it's reusable. So it's very big, can carry a lot of stuff into space. But they've never actually successfully landed both parts, the booster and the spacecraft, back on Earth. And that, if it's going to carry human beings, is a test that they should get to soon.
And they haven't taken anything to orbit yet. I mean, and that for, you know, that's going to be
data center
that's going to be an important milestone. I mean, it's important to say, Ed's right. Like the Artemis mission is kind of in a bind if Starship doesn't come through, but all of SpaceX is in a bind if Starship doesn't come through. Can I say one
thing real quick? I'm just recounting what's happened, but in the 12th test flight, they deployed dummy Starlink satellites. It's like a Pez for fans of the Pez candy. You have that in America, right? Yeah, obviously, duh. But like,
it's been around for a while, Ed.
So the Starship spacecraft.
For my time, even.
I'm sorry.
You can go to the Pez Museum in Connecticut while you're here.
Dear America, I'm sorry.
There is probably an Elon Pez. I don't know that
there
for
was
a fact,
definitely a serious point to this. Basically, how the Starlink satellites deploy out of Starship. There's a slot. They come out the side, kind of like, and they get pushed down and down and down like a Pez. But they did demo the ability to do it, but the payload wasn't real. They were dummies. So I'm just stating that for the record.
Does Elon have to be worried? I mean, Jeff Bezos has become rather chummy with the administration, and do we have to ever worry about Blue Origin and his rockets being able to do some of what Elon
But they're
does.
also an integral part of the Artemis missions moving forward.
Absolutely worried. Although Blue Origin had a huge setback
They did.
recently, and that is why because Blue Origin and SpaceX are competing for this lunar lander part of the mission, and of course. Blue Origin is say they're going to rebuild and everything, but everyone I've talked to in this world says that it's a huge setback.
We're speaking with Max Chafkin, a Bloomberg Businessweek columnist, the host of the Everybody's Business podcast here at Bloomberg. He's author of The Contrarian. Max, Carol mentioned Jeff Bezos. We're going to talk about Blue Origin a little later in the program. Before we do that, you've spent a lot of years covering Tesla and the way that Elon Musk has led Tesla as a public company and his relationship with investors. How should investors right now look at that over the last decade or so as an idea for how he'll run this company and maybe even divide his time? It's kind of different when they're both public.
That I'm not sure how helpful the early years of Tesla are to understanding this. I think SpaceX really looks very similar to the Tesla of the last couple of years. The post AI pivot. And where you have this very good business that is kind of being pushed to the side for reasons that either have to do with Musk's vision of the future. Business. Yeah, in the case of Tesla, it's the autos business, which is this very, very successful, good business. It's the thing that everyone talks about. Elon Musk popularized electric cars, in the United States. But for 2 years or so, it's been de-emphasized. And you look at it, sales have not been growing. I mean, it is in certain ways a challenged business. And then you have this kind of futuristic robots, self-driving cars piece of the business. Same thing with SpaceX. But the one thing I'll say is I think the legacy part of SpaceX is actually a better business than the EV business. I mean, the EV business, as dominant as it was, never reached any kind of like monopoly status. Whereas SpaceX's launch business kind of is that. There are competitors. There are parts of the business where they have more competition than others. But as we're saying, if SpaceX has a huge problem, NASA has a huge problem. A bunch of satellite makers have a huge problem. They really have the market more or less cornered in that piece. And then you have this futuristic stuff that, even Starlink to some extent is futuristic, but of course the data center thing, which is just like pure science fiction. So Starlink is like the robotaxi, data centers are like the humanoid robots.
Not everybody thinks it's science fiction.
Well, just very quick, all the SpaceX investors that phoned me over the last week, thanks for phoning me. Interesting that SpaceX aren't encouraging you to come on Bloomberg television and radio, but they also would make the case that it's not analogous to Tesla, but they would also say that SpaceX should get credit right now for being a much more diversified business than we talk about. It is more than rockets, and they have a good interim before Orbital Data Center.
Ed Ludlow staying with us, host of Bloomberg Tech. Max Chafkin, thank you so much. Bloomberg Businessweek columnist, host of Everybody's Business podcast. Check it out on the weekend. Shares of SpaceX, first day of trading as a publicly held company. Stock right now, $171.31 a share. That stock is up about 27%. Tim and I continuing right here on Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Oil lower, stocks higher, and SpaceX surging in its first day out. Right now we got SpaceX up by 26.1%. S&P 500 extending this week's advance. On the week up 0.6%. That after last week's 2.6% swoon. Elon Musk's space company soaring after a record-breaking IPO. Again, we do have shares of SpaceX up by 26%, now at $170. Our coverage will continue right here on Bloomberg. S&P up 33, hopes for peace sending stocks higher. Oil lower, the S&P up 0.4%. Right now it's 74.27. Dow Industrial is up 355, up 0.7%. While Nasdaq is up 79, up 0.3%. The Nasdaq 100 index up 0.7%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares outperforming, up by 1.1%. The VIX just above 18 with the SOX, the Philadelphia Semiconductor Stock Index up 2.3%, the 10-year 4.47%, the 2-year 4.07%, and the 30-year remaining below 5%, 4.96%. Spot gold at $42.18 the ounce, up 0.1%. A retreat for crude, $84.71 a barrel, down 3.4%. Brent 87.18, drop there of 3.5%. Again, first day out for SpaceX. Right now, we got SpaceX up by 27.1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcast. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Yeah, certainly we're focusing on SpaceX. We were quickly talking before we got going, and you take a look at what's going on with Tesla. We've seen it up as much as 1.5% today. It's been down 3% in today's session. Right now, Tim, just a gain of about 0.5 percentage point.
All right, that's Tesla, but SpaceX certainly only moving in one direction, opening 11% higher than that IPO price yesterday, up as much as 30.8%, right now up about 27.3%. So far, this looks like a pretty successful first day of trading. I think it's fair to say 355 million shares as we speak have traded hands.
Feels pretty calm. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovec, also Ed Ludlow, host of Bloomberg Tech, of course, on Bloomberg Television, Monday through Friday at 11 a.m., who has been all things. How long do you feel like you've been talking about this IPO?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to when we broke the story even the end of last year that the whole point of the IPO was, they needed lots of money to buy chips to put in space. And as I told you a few times this month, people laughed at that report at the time, like that's not why they would IPO. And then the prospectus hit and here we are.
They need money.
Yeah. They need GPUs in space, but yeah, they need money for that. Yeah.
I want to bring in Anthony Hughes, Bloomberg News, U.S. equity capital markets reporter. He joins us from the Bloomberg News Bureau here in New York, just steps away from us. Anthony, pretty successful out of the gate, I think it's fair to say. Nasdaq should be patting itself on the back right now.
Yes, Tim. I think for a IPO of this size, a 20%, 30% gain is a pretty balanced outcome, from the bank's perspective. Obviously you never want to see the stock go down, but you don't want to see the stock necessarily go through the roof either. So, 20-30% for a high growth company too. I mean, you want to see a decent return. So, I think people will go away and think this is a relatively balanced outcome compared to a lot of IPOs we've seen in the past.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've been talking with you as well to the lead up, Anthony. I don't know. What's top of mind? What have you been thinking about as you watch the trade today and what's important here?
Well, I think we've been looking at the level of volume, and certainly out of the gate, they got about 10% of the stock paired up and, at the opening print there. So that's sort of something you'd like to see to make sure it's an orderly outcome. I think the main thing, it can be a little bit of an anticlimax in some ways, the first day of trading for a stock, because we've said a lot already about this company. We're just seeing basically the results today. But, it's a fairly orderly first day of trading. Started up 11%. Funnily enough, if you go back to Facebook in 2012, it actually went up 11% on the opening print too, but then finished flat. So it doesn't look like this is going to happen here for SpaceX. But, sometimes, these early gains can evaporate as the day goes on. But, it's just one day of trading, and there's many days ahead. And anyone who's been a long-term shareholder of Tesla knows that there's some tough days and some great days. But longer term, Tesla did very well, and I guess a lot of people are hoping to see something similar here. Yeah. But on a larger scale, and this company's got such a big market cap, it's obviously hard to expect that SpaceX will do something like Tesla in terms of a relative gain, but obviously SpaceX got big dreams and sort of unlimited hopes about what they can do in space.
I'm glad you brought up Facebook. We were talking about that just a few minutes as we came live to you before. SpaceX up 28%. Ed Ludlow, we're going to get to Nick Colas in just a second, but before we do, just remind us today who can actually sell the shares. This is a really important point because there's been a lot of discussion about, who are the new centimillionaires, who are the new millionaires, and who are the venture capitalists who have made billions on this.
Just a few rapid fire things. There's a big difference between economic ownership of this stock and voting power. So Elon Musk has 84% voting power, right? And so he's locked up for 366 days, but he's going to be a big seller, and he also has a big options packet that he can exercise. And then everyone else is kind of tiered. So after the Q4 26 earnings release, 20% of the existing shares are free of a lockup. Who can sell today is basically anyone that participated in the offering, the $75 billion. And what was so interesting to hear from the buy side today is begrudgingly their participation in the open market as buyers, because loads of people didn't get allocations. We have so much time, we can talk about the venture funds later, but even those that are subject to lockups, the venture funds will distribute the shares back to their LPs, which are endowments, pension funds. They don't just give them cash.
Yeah.
But those, they won't sell the stock. You know, that at least that's what people keep telling me.
Yeah, it's longer term, right? They're going to stay with it. Hey, we're talking, of course, with Ed Ludlow, host of Bloomberg Tech. We've also got with us Anthony Hughes, Bloomberg News, ECM reporter, joining us here as well. And then let's roll into the mix. Nick Colas just joining us here on set, co-founder of Data Trek Research. Good to have you here. You're an independent financial advisory firm. Would you be advising institutional investors, retail investors to own this one?
Well, what we do is we try to give people a framing to understand their decision. And by that count, the simple math obviously doesn't add up. This is a very expensive stock relative to any rational measure of value. But we're talking about Elon Musk, who has a tremendous track record of not just success, but convincing people that success is durable. So it's not a calculus based on valuation, it's a calculus based on faith. And plenty of people have a ton of faith and have made billions of dollars with Elon Musk in the past, and they're willing to give him a pass on this one because they think it can happen again.
Well, I want to talk connectivity a little bit with you and the focus on really telecom Starlink when it comes to this IPO. It's, in 2025, it was 61% of the revenue. As I was mentioning earlier, I think for a lot of people who, haven't been to a rocket launch or actually, are big users of the AI tech that SpaceX has, maybe Starlink is the most tangible part of this business that they've interacted with. In your view, that's a pretty good business, right?
It is a phenomenal business. It is a truly
there were so many years when we were talking about, and Ed was reporting on it, the possibility of perhaps that being spun off as its own independent, publicly traded company.
And there are prediction market contracts on that right now, oddly enough. It is a truly disruptive business in the classic Clayton Christensen sense of the word. It's a new technology that offers a product to an underserved community and then builds up from there. So how Amazon started with books and then blew up to everything. Starlink started with rural customers and has blown up to everything. It's exactly the playbook investors want to see. And Elon, as usual, has played it perfectly.
I just recap the numbers. I find that so interesting that you're saying you can't do the math. You kind of can, and what a lot of the existing cap table told me for months and months was, how do I start to model for the Orbital data center business? And what they would say is 2025, not the revenues from Starlink, but connectivity operating income, $4 billion, and the scale of deployment and rate of deployment, literally the operation of putting it into orbit. They just extrapolate out to space-based data center. Can you use faith or hope and do the same on behalf of clients?
Unfortunately, you have to.
Yeah.
There is no other option. There are no orbital data centers in space right now, right? So you are betting on a brand new technology, and what you're betting is the guy who brought you the past couple of interesting technologies can bring you the next one. But it is a faith-based process. It is not based in any math you can rationally model. And I was a sell-side analyst for a decade. I covered the autos. I know how to do a financial model.
Oh, goodness.
To a very strong degree, and this is not one of those analyses. So people can do whatever math they want to do. The stock's going to trade where it wants to trade, and the two may coalesce that they may not.
But real quick, without betraying confidence, do you have faith? In other words, did you tell clients, like, look, this is a trade based on faith. We have faith, make the trade.
Yeah.
What I've told clients is, if you want to put in for the stock, I gave you a range. And I'll run through the numbers. The average IPO since 1980 up 19% on day one. So that's the bogey. 161 for SpaceX is an average IPO one-day pop. If you want to look at 2025, it was a 29% pop. So 174, which is right around where I think we're trading now.
173 and change. Nice.
So boom, 29% is the average IPO pop from last year. If you want to look at 1999, just to go bananas, that was a 71% one-day pop.
I remember
so
that.
So that was, we all, yes, I certainly do as well. I was working for Steve Cohen at the time, and that was an amazing year. That would be a 231 close.
Would Steve Cohen be buying this?
Steve Cohen would have gotten an allocation and probably have sold half of it on the open and be trading the other half very intelligently, because that's what he does.
That's really interesting. Hey, Nick Colas is with us, co-founder of Data Trek Research. Ed Ludlow's with us. Anthony Hughes, you've been sitting by patiently here at Bloomberg News. You mentioned, though, Nick mentioned SpaceX. The stock right now is up almost 28% here, 172 and change in its first day of trading. Anthony Hughes, you've been thinking about the valuation, writing about it. Got a question for Nick for us.
Yeah, well, I think one of the interesting questions, Nick, is, we do see it with a lot of these hot IPOs that they come pretty, they can come it can rise pretty sharply out of the gate and then fall off pretty quickly in the weeks and months afterwards. I just wondered, do you think there's an argument with SpaceX that perhaps it could do something a little bit differently just because there's such a need for people to buy the stock, the index inclusion and stuff like that? Do you think that could be a factor here in helping to sort of put a bit more of a floor onto the stock?
I think that it is a factor for the next couple of weeks because we have the Q entry, I think, on July 5th, if I recall correctly, 15 days after pricing. So you're going to see some offset of people who are owning the stock right now selling it to the Qs when it gets included in the 100. Past that, there seems to be a pretty even match, and they actually did earlier lockup expirations for employees and insiders than usual. Mm-hmm. So you actually can pair the additional add of stock to the Qs to the unleashing of stock from the individual owners that have it right now. So it should balance out. But I will make one broad macro point. It's very important. Most IPOs don't work. Most IPOs underperform in year one. And so to beat those odds is relatively hard. Stocks take time to season. Managements take time to season. This is not a company that has a lot of prior public market experience.
But the executives have a lot of prior public market experience. Elon Musk, for example, Gwen Shotwell, for years, the COO, has been not talked about as much anymore, but being like the adult in the room.
Yes, and she is.
At SpaceX. So I think people could push back on the experience part of this a little bit.
That is fair. The Elon thing cuts both ways.
Okay.
Look at the 5-year chart on Tesla and tell me that thing's been a value creator for the last 3 years. It just hasn't. So there is...
Is Tesla the model we should be looking at, Nick, in terms of for SpaceX, or that's not fair?
I think it's entirely fair because both are basically on a Musk premium and a massive one. Tesla's going to earn maybe $2 a share this year. Stock trades, 200 times that? So you're talking about big valuations in both names. And I thought it was interesting, looking at Tesla at 1.5 trillion and this at, call it 1.92. You're talking about, two very large companies based on one person's vision, but not a lot of cash flow. That's the common factor. And you can be a seasoned management team, but I don't know any other seasoned management team that can hold those together besides Elon's teams.
Yeah. Ed, do you have a question for Nick? Because I know Nick's going to leave us after this segment. So
the lockups are so interesting, and we remind ourselves the oversubscription. Actually, what's crazy? 4x to 5x oversubscription doesn't even seem that wild to me. Look at what's happening in China market for IPOs, 20x sometimes. I digress. There's a lot of evidence that SpaceX employees wanted to buy more shares. And the unusual difference with SpaceX is the secondaries market. They've had regular liquidity windows. Might that be a difference this time?
It certainly could be, but everything's a function of price, right? If this thing goes to 400, even the most ardent insider might be tempted to sell. So it's a function of price.
All I'm going to say, if the stock tanks a little bit, it makes it cheaper for SpaceX to buy it and merge the companies.
Very, very quick. Many times, SpaceX was the leader of the secondaries. They bought back shares from employees, and we never really reported on it, and that was true at the time. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just think there's just so many moving aspects of this. Nick Colas, thanks for jumping in here.
Thank
we really
you.
appreciate it. The perspective and data was really helpful. Co-founder, Data Trek Research, of course, joining us here in studio. We're going to continue with Ed Ludlow, host of Bloomberg Tech. Our thanks to Anthony Hughes. Be sure to check out all of his reporting on the Bloomberg and at Bloomberg.com, a member of our trusted Bloomberg News team.
I've got some great news for the folks getting in touch with me on the Bloomberg terminal right now saying we need more SpaceX coverage today. Because we have more SpaceX coverage today. Not just next on the special edition of Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, but also kicking off at the 2 p.m. hour as well.
SpaceX, for those listening on radio, the stock's still up 28%, 173.12 cents a share.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, and Bloomberg Originals.
All right, everybody, how about almost $2.3 trillion for a stock? That's its market cap on its first day of trading. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovec, along with our Ed Ludlow here at Bloomberg headquarters in New York City. We've got SpaceX. It's now a publicly held company.
Yeah, it's up 28.3%. It was up just over 30%, a little bit just about last hour. 367 million shares have traded hands. If I look at most on the Bloomberg terminal in terms of volume, by a long shot, it is the most actively traded stock today. Not a very big surprise.
And I want to bring in Ed right now. I mean, this is just kind of interesting. We've been talking about how it feels kind of calm. You were there, though, when the stock opened. How did it feel? Like when it just, we were watching kind of the indications come down, but nonetheless, the stock began opening. I think it was $150 a share that it came out of the gate. I don't know. You went through an hour on Bloomberg Tech. What was kind of some of the folks saying?
It certainly seemed calm, but with the added context that this has almost been premeditated. It was unusual how SpaceX conducted the days that came before its trading debut, setting a price of $135 a share before a roadshow had even kicked off, raising the question, well, what's the point of even doing a roadshow? And as we reported at Bloomberg, this was Elon Musk and the other SpaceX execs having control over a process, but also the banks being left to market a price. It gave some certainty. So there wasn't this kind of crazy volatility. Isabel Lee, who you guys know well, wrote the most important story ahead of trading debut, which was how were the technologies and mechanics behind financial markets going to transact that volume of orders and messages. Because remember, that's how markets work. It's a communication between real humans, AI aside. So the Nasdaq seemed in that moment to have full control over it. But it was on the live pictures you saw from inside the room. The Nasdaq gathered everyone. There was a clap, and then it hit, about 45 past the hour. I think I'm right in saying right. So it's interesting. So now we're at 172 on a fully diluted basis, $2.37 trillion value.
I think what was also so interesting about this, and I was tuning into Bloomberg Surveillance earlier today, we also had a view from the gray market, which is really interesting, hyper liquid. Yeah. And we saw then that shares were anticipated to pop 30% as a result of trading there.
Somebody's going to have to write a textbook or a history book about that. When we say gray markets, another word for it is shadow markets, but they are essentially financial instruments that in some ways work as a proxy before the equities trades in the US exchanges. But there's also this dance that happens, right? What we call indications of opening.
Yeah.
They went up and up and up, and then they came down and down and down. And in the end, it's academic because once it starts trading, it's trading. Yeah.
175, 174, 172, 170, all the way down to 150.
Yeah.
Right. And we saw that happening. All right, guys, we're going to continue full team coverage here on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, a special edition, an extended version, I should say. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovec, along with Ed Ludlow, of course. Right now, though, we do want to get a check on trading as we continue to track it. A look at the overall market on this last trading day of the week. Tossing it over to you, Charlie Powell.
Thank you very much indeed. We are looking at an up week here for the S&P 500 index, significant after last week's swoon, but do want to continue with our coverage of the SpaceX IPO because you have got courtside seats into what's happening with history right now. Biggest IPO ever, and right now we do have SpaceX lifting off up by 28% right now, 172.42 where we stand, so shares up 27%. Did get as high as 176.52. That was a gain of 31%. Our coverage will continue right here on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. Rest of the market higher. Right now, the Dow, the S&P, Nasdaq all advancing. Nasdaq 100 index up 0.7%. Stocks are climbing on U.S.-Iran optimism. The S&P up 30, 74.24, up now by about 0.4%. Dow Industrials up 360 on the Dow, gain there of 0.7%. Nasdaq up 0.2%, and repeating on Nasdaq 100 up 0.6%. Interestingly, small caps outperforming. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares up now by 1.1%. All of this with the stocks up by 2%. The VIX just above 18 and a 10-year at 4.47%. Spot gold up $8 the ounce, 42.20 up by 0.2%. And West Texas Intermediate crude at $85 a barrel. WTI down 3.1%. Brent at 87.44, drop there of just about 3.3%. So again, first day out for SpaceX, shares up now by 28%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Charlie Pellet there. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovec, along with Ed Ludlow. I'm just looking at X here, and Elon Musk, I think it was about 37 minutes ago, saying, I love the incredible people of SpaceX beyond words.
It's nice to be able to use your own product to send that out on the day when the project's included in one of the companies that,
increasingly becoming a conglomerate of, a future version or a current version.
He's always loved the idea of a super app.
Yeah, right? And these pieces. Hey, folks, we do want to get another check on the trading session. Yahaira Anand has been tracking it here at Bloomberg News. She's at the Nasdaq market site in Times Square. Take it away.
Well, I want to echo what Ed said, because one of the most surprising aspects of today is just how smoothly this IPO has gone. So there is definitely an enormous feeling of relief here at the Nasdaq, because from the moment I got here, you felt the gravity of the moment, of the biggest IPO we've ever seen. SpaceX President Gwynne Shotwell, CFO Brett Johnson were here at the Nasdaq. Elon Musk joined, of course, remotely from Texas, and you had crowds of fans outside hoping to catch a glimpse of him, but of course he was not here. So there was just a lot of excitement, but also pressure for it to go off without a hitch. And obviously it has so far. The stock opened just over 2 hours after the opening bell, and we've seen it continue to hold this substantial premium to its IPO price, and pretty stable, I will also add. And according to one wealth manager I spoke with this afternoon, many investors didn't receive all the shares they requested in the offering. His firm, for example, received only about 17% of the shares it requested. And so if that experience was widespread, it suggests there are still investors who wanted exposure to SpaceX and didn't get it. So helping to explain why demand has remained so strong.
Yahaira Anand, holding down the fort at the Nasdaq. Appreciate it, Yahaira. I want to bring it back, Ed Ludlow, the host of Bloomberg Tech. He's here with us in our Bloomberg Businessweek studio for the next hour and hopefully a little more. We're going to get to Ross Gerber in just a second. Before we do, though, bring us up to speed on the lockup period you can sell and who sold the shares yesterday in that.
Right. So the reason it's important is you asked me who can sell shares today, and that is partly answered in what is an unusual or not typical lockup. So typically, you allow in an IPO insiders to sell shares after 6 months. In this case, Elon Musk's entire stake of 6.4 billion shares is locked up for a full year, and then everyone else is staggered. Apart from if you were in that bucket of employees, friends, and family, 5% of the float allocated on the directed share program, if you participated in that, you are, per the proxy, allowed to sell those Class A shares today. It's a small amount, but there was a little discrepancy between our reporting where we said retail got 20% allocation to about $15 billion. Gwynne Shotwell, the president and COO of SpaceX, in an interview on another network said outside of institutional investors, it was 33%. But I think she's mathing that directed share program and maybe other sort of entities that are more directly related to the company. Yeah.
So in terms of trading, it may take a while to see what kind of real big movement we get in terms of some insiders who had positions.
But again, even prior to the offering, there's so much evidence that SpaceX employees used the opportunities of the last calendar year to buy more stock if they could, hold on to the stock. And, 4,000 or plus millionaires have been minted inside that company, talking about SpaceX staff. That the hypothesis that people present to me every hour at the moment is that don't think they're all going to retire or go and just do something frivolous. They'll either stay at SpaceX or they'll start their own companies. And, it's kind of interesting.
What about the 400 who have $100 million in net worth as a result of this, at least according to that New York Times article?
Congratulations to them.
You can have it, you can quit any day. It's pretty cool. Ed staying with us, of course. Let's get to someone who we talk to a lot when it comes to all things Elon. He's owned and sold shares of Tesla. He owns several Teslas, including the Cybertruck. He's been a fan and a critic of Elon the person. Back with us. So great to have here on this day. Ross Gerber, President and CEO of Gerber Kawasaki Wealth and Management, Investment Management, joining us here in studio. Hey, Ross, are you?
I'm a SpaceX owner too. You didn't mention that.
Well, that's
explain.
So explain away.
Well, explain away. I got involved with this wonderful deal that was presented to me 4 years ago to invest in Twitter. And boy, oh boy, did we do great with that, huh? So I had written down that stake in Twitter to about 25% of its original investment. And then somehow XAI came and bought Twitter. And then somehow SpaceX bought XAI. And now today, I've now made like over 3 times my money investing in Twitter. So, there is a thing called luck in the world, and I'm lucky.
So you've tripled your money from 4 years ago in investing in the take private of what is now X and owned by XAI, which is part of SpaceX, of course. What do you do with that part of ownership? Do you hold on to it or do you sell it when you can?
Well, I'm building a new pool, but that has nothing to do with my SpaceX. I want to continue to employ lots of people because it's fun. But no, I'm holding my SpaceX.
No, an actual pool. I was thinking.
Yeah, I'm building an actual physical pool.
Okay.
Like in the AI era, I'm taking my AI profits and doing something really worthwhile, employing people to dig holes. But that said, SpaceX is one of the most interesting companies I've ever seen. And we have such a unique viewpoint of SpaceX because we work with so many SpaceX clients, and we're getting more all the time. And we've really been focusing on helping SpaceX employees because it's down the street from us here in Los Angeles is kind of one of their main hubs. And so, I've met some incredible people over the last several months doing incredible things. These are the highest caliber engineers in the world that have made our space program, because it's really the United States space program, just so amazingly unique and successful. So what we have in store for us over the next decade is really exciting.
Hey, so Ross, just want to ask you, so you own the stock, you're happy about that. Will you continue owning it? Or do you think the valuations?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm not selling it. I got my 10-year-old kid sitting here because he's out of school. And when I start thinking about what his life is going to be like when he's only 20, like 10 years from now, like space is just going to be something that's like, I keep making this joke. It's like easier to go to space than New Jersey, And so, the truth is, I think it's harder to go from New York to New Jersey than it will be in space to go to space in 10 years.
And Ross, to be clear, this is you, Ross Gerber, personally, as opposed to Gerber Kawasaki.
That's correct. I personally own the shares, and my firm, in our own firm account, owns shares, because when the Twitter deal came by, Elon really didn't want to do the deal. So we didn't actually sell the deal to our clients because I was like, I can't sell this. The guy doesn't want to do it, And so they basically called us the last night and was like, do you still want to invest? Because we're actually doing this. And so I just wrote a check because it was Elon, But none of our clients have been able to participate in this. Fortunately and unfortunately, because remember, it started off pretty bad.
You didn't get an allocation or submit a bid for an allocation in the IPO or go into the open market today. I'm being mechanical, but I'm just...
No, we haven't done open market purchases of SpaceX today because our firm does not buy IPOs for very good reasons, which I'm happy to talk about.
Well, and then well, can I ask you?
And secondly, we did request IPO allocations for clients of ours that are at Fidelity and Schwab because we work with both of them, and they did provide. So some of our clients did get small allocations of SpaceX stock today as well.
So the hypothesis,
but those were unsolicited.
Understood.
The clients really wanted it. Yeah.
The reason that's insightful is there are people listening to Bloomberg Businessweek or watching Bloomberg Businessweek that are in the same boat, right? And they're just thinking what did I do here? But the hypothesis presented to me by loads of people is they didn't sell their Tesla shares to get some liquidity to participate, in part because they just see the Tesla SpaceX merger happening imminently. And so what would be the point? May I ask where you stand on that idea today?
Well, I tweeted again this morning. I mean,
I know you did.
How long does this take till they put these companies together? And then even Gwen Shotwell today didn't, poo-poo the idea when it was brought to her and actually said that it makes sense. So, we know this is going to happen at some point. And I think a lot of that has to do with what valuations SpaceX and Tesla really are to make this combination work for both sets of shareholders so that it doesn't create a lot of, lawsuits and other, issues. So I think it's definitely a foregone conclusion. Now, I do agree with you that props up Tesla stock because, people are like, well,
I didn't say that.
Well, okay. My feeling is it props up Tesla stock because people don't want to sell their Tesla if it's just going to get bought out by SpaceX anyways, And so I do think that helps Tesla, that the perception is that they will be acquired by SpaceX or merge.
So Ross, maybe in your view, it works for investors, but does it work from an actual operations perspective?
Oh,
does it
100%.
Why?
In fact, well, I would argue that this is really unfair to Tesla. And it's one of the real gripes I've had over the last several years is the way they took, Tesla's chips and Tesla's engineers and built XAI, which was the brains of Tesla's, Optimus robot and full self-driving. And then Elon goes on TV and says, this is the entire value of the company is based off if we can succeed with full self-driving. But yet the brains of full self-driving isn't owned by Tesla. That's super wrong. It just doesn't make any sense that I have a bunch of robots and cars that will not work without another company's technology. So Tesla, in my mind, is worthless if it doesn't merge because it doesn't own the IP to the brains to their own products. Like it just makes no sense.
All right. Speaking of the brains behind anything with Elon's universe is obviously Elon Musk. And we talk a lot about risk to the company. We talk about governance, but we also just talk about, how much what he does, his brain, his oddness, if you will, some might say, is what makes this company
Eccentricity.
tick. You're much better. On this and on the governance and stock structure, Nell Minow, Value Edge Advisors Vice Chairman, joined the closed team yesterday on Bloomberg Television. Let's all listen up to what Neil had to say.
All of those protections that you talked about, the ability to vote proxies, the ability to sell the stock, the ability to sue, all of those are there to reassure investors. Having independent directors on the board, all of those are there to reassure investors that their money is being taken care of in a principled way for their benefit, not for the benefit of the insiders. And all of those have been obliterated by this offering. Elon Musk has appointed himself CEO for life. Mm-hmm. He's the only one who can remove himself. Not even his board of directors can remove him. He has all the voting control. He has basically built a moat with alligators around himself, and that's not good for shareholders.
Nell Minow, Value Edge Advisors Vice Chairman on Bloomberg Television yesterday. Ross, my understanding that you were kind of laughing as you were listening to that.
Well, there's no companies that have ever been run like Tesla and SpaceX in the history of public companies. And so I find her outrage to be humorous because that's basically how it's worked for Tesla for the last 15 years. And, the board is not independent. They do whatever Elon says. The pay packages are approved because index funds just push yes to whatever management puts forward. So Elon's taken advantage of a system where 20% of his company is owned by robots that don't make any decisions. There's nothing worse than Vanguard for shareholder rights. So if she wants to complain, she should be complaining about Vanguard, not Tesla, and the fact that Elon takes advantage of the fact that, there's basically going to be nobody but, somebody like me who goes out on TV. But as far as trying to vote change into Tesla or SpaceX, never going to happen. So does he take care of shareholders? Yeah, they've made a lot of money. So that's taking care of shareholders. Any way you do the math, whether I vote proxies or not, what matters is whether I'm making money. And I've made over 100 times my money investing in Tesla. And so I just think, when you invest with Elon, you have no rights. You get on the bus. You don't like the bus, get off the bus. But if you want to be on that bus, he has rewarded people who has done that. And that's why people are giving him such a ridiculously high valuation, is because he has rewarded shareholders in the past and in a way that very few CEOs have. So, I get the outrage and all that, then don't buy the stock.
Ross, may I
but
just...
it was very clear in the S1,
Exactly. And I'm just relying on recounting what was in the S1, right? The restriction that's placed on Musk's comp, I'm just going to read it out because, it's the only way the audience will come to have a sense of it. He has a 1 billion restricted Class B shares award that's contingent, A, on market cap milestones. So if he achieves the market cap milestones, the shareholders get rewarded, you say. But Musk's compensation package is tied to establishing a permanent human colony on Mars with at least 1 million inhabitants. I don't want to give a long-winded question, but you explained to the audience how you came to be a SpaceX investor and shareholder. That goal, what does it mean to you?
It means I might have a chance of not having to pay him the billion shares, you know? So I kind of like that, you know? I don't think we're going to have 1 million people living on Mars. So, you know, that's good news if you're a SpaceX shareholder. And I can give you a lot of reasons that Elon might want to argue with me about, and I'm a more practical person, but I don't think you could talk 1 million people into going to Mars, you know? Like, unless Mars looks a lot like Hawaii, I don't think people want to go there. And Mars doesn't look like Hawaii. So I don't know. I don't know who's moving to Mars.
We're speaking with Ross Gerber.
Away, by the way, it's far away and there's no air.
Ross Gerber, President and CEO of Gerber Kawasaki Wealth and Investment Management. I did make that point earlier in our last hour about when people compared Mars to potentially being the next California. I pushed back a little bit there. Yeah,
I'm not moving from here for anything.
Yeah, you like
even
Santa
if they
Monica.
put socialists here, I'm not moving.
I still think he's going to put Optimus robots on and 1 million. Maybe
that's what I think. That's what I think. I think the robots are the ones doing the work in space and going to Mars.
So Ross, I want to put aside the question of sort of governance right now and these pay packages and just get back to your view of SpaceX shares right now. You said Gerber Kawasaki does not buy on the first day of IPOs. What restrictions do you have or have you put out? It's sort of a rules-based buying when it comes to IPOs. And when would you start getting your clients in, even if they're not, asking for it?
No, they're asking for it.
Some of them, we've talked to a lot of wealth managers lately who have said some people want it badly. Some people want nothing to do with it. Like we've had three examples of that recently this week on air.
Yeah, and that's, we have so many clients. We have all those examples, right? What I think, because the way my firm works, we don't tell people no. Like if a client's like, I really want to do this, we don't say no. It's our job to advise our clients. So we advise them of the risks of it, and then we'll execute the transactions as unsolicited if they really want to do that. And would do that. Now I haven't done that today for anybody because I've talked them out of it, because they listen to my advice, which is IPOs are really difficult. Okay. And I've been trading for 32 years and I did .com and I trade billions of dollars. So just from my experience, it's really, really hard to make binary decisions like I'm putting $100,000 of my retirement money into SpaceX today and that's it. And I will never look at it for 10 years because that's just not what investors do. So if you were able to do that, I would say, okay, buy the IPO, pay up for it, but in 10 years, you'll be happy. But nobody actually does that. Right. What happens is they look at their account in 6 months and it's down 30%, and then they panic and they sell it right before it goes back up. And so investor psychology and behavior makes IPOs extremely difficult because of the volatility. So I don't know what the market's going to do over the next 12 months, let's say. And, and then you've got a very high priced IPO that has no PE ratio. And then maybe markets go down for some reason. Well, SpaceX is going to go down more than the market. And if the market stays the same or goes up, there's the potential that SpaceX stays the same or also goes up. But what I say is, how much upside can you get if you buy the stock today until this company actually produces earnings, which might be 3 to 5 years from now? So you've got plenty of time to get into SpaceX. So if you really, really want it, what I tell people is buy 20% of what you want to buy today. If it's $10,000 in SpaceX, you buy $2,000 today, and then you wait a month and you buy another $2,000, and you wait another month and you get in over the next 5 months. But what I would really say is wait till the lockups expire. Wait, there's a lot of liquidity and a lot of people want to get this liquidity. They've worked at SpaceX for a very long time. And they're not going to be quitting and they're not this and that, but they want to buy a house in LA. And a house in LA costs $2 to $3 million just to get in. And these people are living in apartments. You see what I'm saying? So they're going to sell some of their stock to buy a house. And they're going to sell some of their stock so that they have some financial security, which is what we're advising them. But many of the employees at SpaceX are not selling their stock. And I just want to make it very clear. Many of them, these are the people who believe in their mission, and they're working extremely hard. And after meeting many of these people, I believe in their mission. And Elon gets too much credit. I just want to say this. It's not Elon Musk that's made SpaceX successful. It's the people there. Elon Musk is a visionary and he guides the company. But the truth of the matter is he does not really run SpaceX. The people running SpaceX are excellent.
Ross, 30 seconds left, though. We do think about succession. So does it become even more important on this day where we continue to see the Elon universe get bigger and bigger, that there is a succession plan in place? Is there one that you know of? Just quickly.
See, at SpaceX, yes. I think if Elon died tomorrow, SpaceX would be fine, actually. SpaceX has great management, and they've been very independent for a long time. And many of the employees, and I'm not going to, say where they were, divisions they were, they don't like Elon either. Okay, they having a mission like going to Mars or going to the moon or building a starship is what motivates people. A lot of what Elon does hurts SpaceX and hurts the company. So SpaceX has a much better management team than Tesla when it comes to succession, and I'm much more confident about its success, even if Elon isn't involved.
Well, some great color and context on all things SpaceX and Elon, as he always does. Ross, have a great weekend. Thank you so much. Ross Gerber, President and CEO of Gerber Kawasaki Wealth and Investment Management, joining us from Los Angeles. Let's get another check on the trade. Back to Charlie Pellet we go.
Hi, thank you very much, Carol Massar. Indeed, let's recap, reset on SpaceX. The big story of the day, we got you covered here at Bloomberg. SpaceX shares right now, they are up 25%. First day out, 169.49 where we stand on SpaceX. We do have SpaceX shares again up by 25.5%. The rest of the stock market pushing higher. The Dow, the S&P, Nasdaq, and the Nasdaq 100 index all gaining. Stocks are climbing on U.S.-Iran optimism. S&P up 0.3% on track for a winning week after last week's sell-off. We've got the Dow higher now by 357 points, up 0.7. Nasdaq up 0.1%. The Nasdaq 100 index, full of those big tech names, up 0.5%. Russell 2000 index outperforming, up 0.9%. The SOX up 1.8%. The VIX holding just above 18 with a 10-year 4.47%. Gold up $13 the ounce, 42.25, up 0.3%. And West Texas Intermediate crude slumping 3.3%, just below $85 a barrel. Brent crude 87.30, lower now by 3.4%. Again, SpaceX shares up 25.9%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Carol and Tim, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Our special edition, our extended edition of Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, covering the SpaceX IPO. Tim Stenovec, Carol Massar here, and of course, Bloomberg Tech host Ed Ludlow. We want to bring into the conversation Cam Harvey, professor of finance at the Fuqua School of Business at Duke University, joining us from Durham, North Carolina. Cam, great to have you here. Tim, I think, did you hear him earlier this morning?
Yeah. I loved your analysis on surveillance earlier this morning, Cam. I want to bring you right in. Again, we are joined by Ed Ludlow, too, of our Bloomberg Tech team. Ed standing by with us here in New York, a special visit from San Francisco. So, Cam, I'm just curious about valuation here, because you work at a business school. It's where you teach, corporate finance, maybe DCF analysis to really value a stock. How do you value SpaceX?
Yeah, so there are certain fundamental things that we can learn from history and try to apply them in terms of what we see. So the first thing is that when we look at IPOs in general, there's usually a gap between the allotment price, the 135, and what happens on the first day. So the IPO is priced lower and the price pops. Most investors don't get the allotment. I applied for 10 shares through my online broker. I got one. So 90% of my order was unfilled, and I need to buy at the inflated price of, let's say, $170. So the first thing is expected that it's underpriced to make sure all the shares go out. The second is that over the longer term, let's say 3 years, IPOs don't really outperform a passive investment like the S&P 500. Even if you match the large ones like SpaceX, the performance is modest or negative. And what is the reason for that? The reason is that the price is fully priced, that the explosive upside has already been realized before the IPO. The investors that were accredited or qualified, the ones that bought at $10 or $20, they reap this huge upside. By the time it gets to IPO, by the time that the average investor gets to buy this stock, it is expensive. And when you're buying high, the expected returns are low. So investors need to be aware of this. They're not buying at $10. They're buying at $170.
All right, on that, we're talking with Cam Harvey, professor of finance at the Fuqua School of Business. You know, we kind of want to roll into this conversation. Jim Chanos was on earlier on Bloomberg Television with Tom Keene and Scarlett Fu. Of course, he is the founder and president of Jim Chanos, and of course, he's a noted bear, but he's also a noted skeptic, as we like to say. Chanos and Company, of course, is his company. And he talked about the company and the IPO. Let's listen in, everybody.
It just struck me as very, very odd that right before the IPO, they would pivot to a much lower margin and lower valuation business than the hopes and dreams, which you guys have mentioned, I've mentioned, based on producing these wonderful AI agentic software products from Grok. And it's one of many head scratchers about this deal.
And that, of course, is Chanos and Company founder and president Jim Chanos on the SpaceX IPO. I mean, it is kind of interesting, you know, the steps to the IPO. You do wonder about kind of the valuations and the businesses and what this company is really, what it is right now, and the bet on XAI, correct?
Right. Yeah, I think, you know, my question for Professor Harvey would be how extraordinary in the history of public market debuts it was for SpaceX to do a regulatory filing and say, oh, by the way, we've kind of pivoted our entire business by renting out compute capacity to Anthropic, one of our biggest rivals. Oh, and also Google, one of our biggest investors and potential rivals. You know, it was done by the book, Professor, but to me, I was like, wow, I didn't have it on the bingo card, you know?
Yeah, so this is obviously very unusual. There's so many aspects of today that make it quite extraordinary, including the size. So think of this IPO as the sum of all the IPOs over the last 4 years. So this is a very notable event. However, I do want to comment on this particular point about pivoting. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important. Indeed, I draw a distinction between today and, let's say, 1999, before the tech bubble burst. And one thing that is different is that the leaders today, the tech leaders today, have no problem with pivoting and switching in the face of a new vision. That's exactly what didn't happen in 1999, that they were set in one particular direction, and when the data went the other way, they just continued in that direction, and a lot of value was destroyed. Whereas today, the tech firms are more than willing to self-disrupt, and they believe that this is an important aspect of their strategy to survive, to grow, and to innovate.
So in other words, Professor Harvey, what I'm hearing you say is this time is different.
Every time is different. And I do believe that 1999 and 2000 is within our memory. So in 1999, people didn't really, they weren't around for what happened in 1929. But many remember the tech bubble and learned from it. And that's why today is different. Yes, there are some stocks that are extremely highly valued, And you could argue that some of these stocks have like a lottery-like characteristic, that people are buying them knowing that the expected return might be modest, but there is a small probability of explosive upside.
So at 168, roughly where SpaceX is right now, in your view, is that fairly valued?
Oh, so I'm definitely not going to give you my valuation of the stock.
That's too bad.
I knew you were going to ask that, but I'm not going there. So what I am saying is if you look at the historical evidence on IPOs, the evidence suggests that the return over and above a benchmark like the S&P 500 is modest or zero.
Okay.
Which means that these are fully valued. So if you expect to get the same sort of return that the insiders and the accredited investors got in the past, I think that's naive. The retail investor, the average investor, is forced effectively to diversify their portfolio, and they are faced with a price that is expensive. I can say that the price is expensive, and given historical experience, the expected returns are modest.
Professor Cam Harvey, over at the Fuqua School of Business at Duke University, really, thank you so much for your time. Carol, maybe he didn't want to give us the SpaceX valuation because that's the final exam question on next year's final for those incoming MBA students who start in the fall.
All things Elon. Is he a class yet? I don't even know.
Oh, he was many case studies.
I'm sure he's many case
12
studies.
years ago. There's a great Harvard case study on Tesla.
I'm sure, but
that we did in strategy 10 years ago.
You could spend a whole semester on it. All right, we're going to stick on the SpaceX IPO as that stock continues to trade up about 28%. Oh, right now actually up about 24% in today's session. We're going to come back, and we have been focusing a lot, certainly on SpaceX today. There is another major story, though, of course, pushing stocks higher, and we need to also keep our eyes on it. The U.S. and Iran moving closer to an interim peace agreement meant to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and it helped end that war that has damaged the global economy and caused chaos in the Middle East. But conflicting messages, really from both sides, going back and forth, have caused lingering uncertainty. Now, this is coming as U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright said the U.S. will fully reopen the waterway with or without Iran's assistance.
Yeah, Chris Wright spoke to at the Bloomberg Energy Security Executive Briefing in Houston on Friday.
And we're just going to restore flows ourselves. And flows today close approaching half of the gap, and they're rising. So ultimately, we will restore flows with or without them.
So 7 million barrels a day are getting out right now?
That's a rough estimate, a rough average of where we are right now, and it's rising.
All right, that, of course, is U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright in a moderated panel by our own Anne-Marie Hordern. He did speak earlier, of course, during the Bloomberg Energy Security Executive Briefing in Houston. Anne-Marie joining us right now. She is co-host of Bloomberg Surveillance. And Anne-Marie, interesting conversation, timely conversations with the Energy Secretary. You also caught up with the Chevron CEO, Mike Wirth. As you've been in and around talking with individuals, what seems to be the mood, the tone, the narrative?
Well, definitely this is the first time we've heard from the White House give a specific number and figure about how much oil and oil products they think are actually getting out of the Strait of Hormuz right now, whether that means that they're helping them through escorts or potentially of vessels taking their transponders offline to get energy through. So the Energy Secretary is saying that number's at 7 million barrels a day, much higher than many estimates. Vortexa says it's about 1.8 million barrels a day. JP Morgan put out a note this morning saying it's 5 million barrels a day. So this is a high number, especially given the fact that the Energy Secretary says that it's about 14 million barrels a day that have been taken offline with the Strait of Hormuz closure. Remember, pre-crisis, it's about 20 million barrels a day that go through the waterway. So if they're looking at 14 million barrels a day as the gap, they're starting to narrow that gap by half. And of course, this comes at a time when everyone is focused on whether or not there's going to be a deal or not. And this White House is signaling once again that they are very close to having this deal with Tehran. I would note, though, that, and you mentioned I also caught up with the Chevron CEO, Mike Wirth. He thinks that the number might be a little bit smaller, maybe closer to 3 million barrels a day that's getting out of the Strait of Hormuz. But I think it's important to remember that Iran is still in control of the Strait. The U.S. has a blockade. So in terms of global energy markets, just hearing that more energy is starting to trickle out is a pretty big and important development.
All right, good stuff. Anne-Marie, thank you so much. Anne-Marie Hordern, co-host of Bloomberg Surveillance from the Bloomberg News Houston Bureau. Be sure to check out her interviews with the Energy Secretary Chris Wright, also Chevron CEO Mike Wirth. You can find them on the Bloomberg and at Bloomberg.com.
We've been speaking a lot about SpaceX today. We should note that WTI down about 3.5%, Brent down about 3.5% as well. Still, Brent $87 a barrel, WTI about $85 a barrel.
All right, back to the trade we go and to Charlie Pallett. Charlie, over to you.
Hi, thank you very much indeed. SpaceX, the big story. We got you covered with SpaceX right now up 25.7% at $169.67. Shares surging in their first day of trading following a $75 billion IPO that smashed records. Again, SpaceX up by 25.7%. The rest of the stock market pushing higher, on track for a winning week after last week's decline. S&P right now up 36 at 74.30. That is a gain of 0.5%. Dow Industrials up 425 points now, up by about 0.8%. The Nasdaq Composite Index up 80 for Nasdaq, a gain of 0.3%. The Nasdaq 100 Index up 0.8%. Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares outperforming, up now by 1%. Hopes for a diplomatic breakthrough to end the war in Iran, sending oil prices lower and stocks higher. Right now, we have got the SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange's Semiconductor Stock Index, up 2.2%, with the VIX holding just above 18. 10-year at 4.47%, with the 2-year 4.07%, and the 30-year 4.96%. Spot gold up $14 the ounce to $42.26, up 0.3%. I mentioned the sell-off in crude. WTI now at $84.49 a barrel, down 3.7%. Barrel of Brent 87 even now, down by 3.7%. But again, the day's big story, the SpaceX IPO. Our coverage continues. Right now, SpaceX up by 25.8%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. I'm Charlie Pellett. Carol and Tim, that's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Yeah, a little market cap of about $2.2 trillion. Not too shabby.
No, you type in most go on the Bloomberg terminal. It's a nice check of just volume and what's being actively traded. SpaceX by far the most actively traded stock. 405 million shares have traded hands. The next most actively traded stock, interestingly enough, is Virgin Galactic. It's down more than 30%, and that's only at 360,000 shares trading hands today.
Wow, yeah, that's interesting.
Sorry, that one I should note is that's sort of news volume too. But yeah, that is volume. Yeah, excuse me, 133 million shares have traded hands.
Okay, that makes more sense.
133 million. There we go.
You're sorry. That would have been a bummer.
Yeah.
All right, folks, we're going to continue. There's a lot coming at us, and we are watching a lot of different screens to kind of feel the context of what is certainly a historical day in the markets, the largest IPO ever. We do assume when we go rich go at the end of today that you will have now minted the first trillionaire on Earth, meaning Elon Musk. So there's a lot coming at us. It does feel very calm. It does feel very orderly, though, at this point. So we are continuing with our extended special edition of Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, all in on SpaceX, the IPO, the first day of trading. I'm Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovec. God bless Ed Ludlow, host of Bloomberg Tech, has been with us. He's had a long day, a long lead up to this. And also, we kind of grabbed her as well, brought her to the East Coast.
From Texas.
Loren Grush is with us, Bloomberg News global space reporter. I got to say, she covers all things space. She was a senior science reporter for the tech news website, The Verge. I didn't know you hosted the online show Spacecraft. So you were going around the country exploring what it takes to actually train to go into space. So you're also author of The Six, The Untold Story of America's First Women Astronauts. So you know this world, you know this area. I don't know, what is top of mind for you as you've seen this roll out?
You know, it's actually been a pretty surreal day, especially for a space reporter. I mean, I've been covering SpaceX for a decade now.
Yeah.
You know, I actually heard about this company, many years ago when it was kind of like catching some steam back with, my parents worked for NASA. And even back then, before they retired, we're kind of picking up on this company, So it's kind of been in my life for some time. And, I never thought that I would see them IPO in this way, because the messaging has always been, we will not IPO until we are regularly flying people to Mars. Obviously, that is not happening. But, maybe you could go back and look at the statements that they have made, that you could subjectively kind of change them to say, okay, they're flying Starship regularly, so, maybe that counts. But I didn't have this on my bingo card. I certainly didn't have the AI element of it on my bingo card as well.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, and I want to go into some numbers that SpaceX highlighted in its S1. 650 total launches, 85% of missions flown with one or more reused boosters. In terms of global mass to orbit last year, it was responsible for 80+% of that. It's flown 78 crew members. Yet, as we've gone back to throughout the last 2 hours, space isn't even the biggest portion of the company in terms of revenue. The name is still SpaceX, but it's also got XAI and a host of other companies. In your view, is it still as committed to space as it was back in 2002?
Oh, absolutely. I will admit, when they filed their prospectus, it was an eye-poppingly low number, just how much revenue that the launch business was bringing in compared to Starlink and now this AI business that they newly acquired. I mean, they only brought in about $4 billion worth of revenue on the launch business last year, as compared to something like $11 billion on the connectivity side. And AI is rapidly, matching that launch business revenue. But at the same time, and I did a story about this too, obviously, the future of SpaceX is an AI company, but that launch that they have established is by far their biggest asset. I mean, it's going to put them in a different category when it comes to this new market of putting AI data centers into orbit. Look at, Amazon, right? Amazon has to go out and buy tons of rockets just to get their Starlink competitor into orbit. So that's an added expenditure that they have to have that SpaceX doesn't quite have to have. And they can tap their rockets whenever they want to. If they get Starship up and running, they could potentially do the same thing. But, there's a lot of asterisks that go along with that as well.
Yeah, and the asterisks are codified in the prospectus, right? So, if you haven't been paying attention and it's brand new information to you that there's a company called SpaceX that today did the biggest IPO in history, then let me tell you about Starship. Basically on paper, the most powerful rocket that humankind's developed, but on paper being the operative word. And so clear in the prospectus is that if they don't get Starship not only to work, but be reusable, they can't achieve the orbital data center goals that they have. Humankind won't go to Mars, and all of the economics in between are so tied to that. And it's a simple story, which is why Loren's going to be so busy covering each test flight that they do.
You mentioned orbital data centers almost in passing just now as sort of a foregone conclusion that they would actually not just be a pie in the sky idea, but actually be something that comes to fruition.
Yeah, I actually think the orbital data centers part of it is less of the issue for me than it is the Starship part of it. Because what we have seen with Starlink is that they can operate a massive constellation of satellites. Right now, they are the world's largest satellite operator with upwards of 10,000 satellites. They're going to use the experience of developing those satellites to develop these orbital data centers. Now, granted, I do think there is going to be some engineering challenge involved, right? Those solar panels that they displayed on them are pretty massive, and they're pretty comparable to the solar panels that are on the International Space Station. But so imagine a million of those. But at the same time, they have that experience. I think that gives them an advantage compared to their competitors. It's really the Starship aspect of it, because they are pursuing this holy grail of spaceflight, which is full reusability. It's never been done. They're still having issues with making sure that actually happens. So I really can't put a timetable on when they're going to crack that code. Yeah. But I think what I would point out is that the numbers in their prospectus are obviously kind of odd to put to the public market, right? They're a losing company or a money-losing company. But I think what they're trying to say is take the success that we've had with, bringing down launch costs, reusing rockets in the past, partially reusing. We're going to do that again. So they are confident that people will invest, thinking that they can replicate that success that they've had.
And to Loren's point, the 10,000 satellites that are out there in orbit were all done by Falcon 9. So the basics here, Starship isn't yet proven. one really fascinating bit is SpaceX is also on the hook for all these NASA missions to get America back to the moon.
Right.
So they have this like near-term pressure to start proving that the combined system, it's the shiny, pointy spacecraft on the top, the booster on the bottom. In aggregate, it's also called Starship. Get both pieces of it back landing on Earth and be reusable. And they've actually never done that. Have both pieces. They've done one piece, but one's only half the job.
And I'll also add, it's even more difficult than that. So obviously, Starship you can pack a bunch of satellites in there and get them to Earth orbit, presumably easier than it would be to go to the moon or Mars, because in order to go to these deep space destinations like the moon, like Ed was talking about, they're going to have to refuel. And I think a lot of people don't quite understand the technical challenges that is going to pose. It's going to require back-to-back flights of Starship over and over, and they'll have to dock with a depot Starship in orbit. So just imagine they put one up there, and then they send, it could be 12, it could be 15.
So they will use Starship launches to send fuel to that depot.
Yes.
Then a Starship will stop at the depot, or a vehicle rather, will stop at the depot and get refueled there.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially like filling up for gas on a long distance road trip, right? But a little more complicated than that. But it is going to require that reusability aspect of it. Otherwise, they're just not going to be able to do those back-to-back launches in an economical way, right? It'll cost them a fortune if they can't crack that.
Is it impossible?
I will never say that when it comes to SpaceX.
Is it incredibly difficult?
I think it's an engineering challenge. That's my go-to. It's
He's good at engineering challenges.
Absolutely.
Though.
And they're not breaking any physics here, but what they are doing is a very complicated feat of engineering. But, something that Gwen Shotwell said earlier today, and they've said this before, is that, SpaceX's log line is that they take the impossible and they make it late.
And also, if it was impossible, technically impossible, we wouldn't be here.
You're right.
With the marketing of an IPO of $75 billion and the trading up 26% from the IPO price.
I love what you said about your family. My dad was very involved in early space stuff, and they were doing gyroscopes for guidance systems. That's what they were doing. But this idea of that you can have rockets go up and come back would blow his mind, and he's not with us anymore. But I think about how much he has really pushed the envelope. Having said that, if he doesn't get to Mars, but if he does somehow get data centers out in space and some of these other things, whether it's the Optimus robots and other things, or if XAI becomes this unbelievable, AI behemoth, is that enough for us to love what is ultimately maybe the Elon universe?
I'm sure there will be plenty of fans who will be satisfied with that.
Will it grow into the valuation?
Perhaps,
that stuff alone.
I'm just a lowly rocket reporter.
Sorry.
And now I'm thrust into the world of AI, and so I'm very much going to have to get much more well versed in the AI market. I do wonder though, because like I was saying earlier, this was not on my bingo card in terms of how SpaceX would IPO. I have wondered if the fans of SpaceX do ultimately want this outcome, because the original thesis of SpaceX was to start a human settlement on Mars. That seems to have taken a bit of a detour. I mean, granted, Starship obviously is supposed to be the key to unlocking that.
Yeah.
But there is this big side project that they've established with this orbital data center constellation. So, is it taking away from that original message, which has been so consistent from the beginning?
Yeah, exactly. Hey, speaking of data centers, Ed Ludlow, I don't know how you're doing it. He just doesn't speak. He's putting out stories on the terminal as we are here. He certainly can. You've got a story out here about SpaceX renting out computing after their own teams had trouble using it. This goes to some of their data centers.
Right. So we talked about SpaceX doing the deal with both Anthropic, $1.25 billion a month, and Google, $900 million and more a month to rent compute capacity. Outside of Memphis, Tennessee, there are 3 data centers: Colossus 1, the first one, and then Colossus 2 and Colossus 3. Colossus 1 is 10 miles from the Colossus 2 and Colossus 3 facilities that are right next to each other. And what sources told me was, yes, because they thought it was a smart business plan, they could make money quickly in the short term by renting out the capacity. But the internet infrastructure between Colossus 1 and the other 2 over that 10-mile range is old. So they ran into latency issues of trying to get all 3 buildings to work as a super cluster together. The second issue is that in Colossus 1, there are multiple generations of NVIDIA GPUs, whereas Colossus 2 and 3 have the absolute latest uniform Blackwell systems. You can do that, but it means that the latest chips that work much faster have to wait for the older ones to catch up, which is a bottleneck.
There's a certain irony here, given that connectivity is a segment of SpaceX, and that we're flying on airplanes.
It's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, not in the story.
Streaming video thanks to SpaceX, but for 10 mile away,
XAI and now SpaceX, they are now universally seen as the best builders of data centers, not just the most quickly, but running them the most efficiently on a dollar per token basis. It's a great economic proposition, therefore, to Anthropic and Google.
How did they end up with the data centers that other people want to rent?
Well, that's my point, is that they basically are like, okay, it isn't the best use of this compute capacity.
But how did they see 2-3 years ago that this was going to be in demand right now, whereas Anthropic...
Oh, they didn't see this 2 or 3 years ago. There's a reason we asked Professor Harvey why they did a filing amendment days before the listing on the deal with Google. I think they came to a very recent decision.
Just the infrastructure, that would be necessary.
Elon Musk, in various examples, knew that it would be whoever bought the most chips. He did a post, I'll try and find it in the time we have left, where he said, step 1, buy chips, step 2, ? Step 3, make lots of money. Like that's as simple as that. But in this case, it was very short term, where they were like, there's no point us running our own Grok models inference or training them in an aggregate cluster of the 3 data centers. It's tough for us to do it. We have these technical challenges. Let's make some money. And by the way, like the way that the investors explained it to me is like they played a blinder with that. I mean, what a good idea. I'm paraphrasing, but the investors would say.
I do also think that with SpaceX, they are kind of playing to their strengths, right? So they kind of have recognize that building the infrastructure can be this lucrative business for them. And so they're thinking, okay, well, what can we do better than anyone else? That's launch rockets and build satellites. And so why not, make the infrastructure in space? I think it's just really smart for them.
Loren, before we let you go, we'd be remiss if we didn't ask about where this leaves Blue Origin right now.
Yeah.
Especially in the wake of that disaster just a few weeks ago on the launch pad.
It really was such unfortunate timing, from a competitive standpoint. Yes, so a couple weeks ago, a New Glenn rocket exploded very spectacularly during a test on a launch pad. And I think the fact that it exploded on the launch pad is probably the worst part, because it kind of obliterated that launch pad. And, the Blue Origin has come out and said that some parts are salvageable, other parts, definitely. We saw towers collapse. So they're in the midst of rebuilding that, but that launch pad infrastructure is just as, if not more important than the rocket sometimes, because they already have the other rockets in the queue, but they can't really launch, and they only had that one launch pad. So it really is, it took them out of commission for what could be a really long time.
Real quick, it was 9 months ago, Elon Musk, step 1, buy step 1, buy an expletive load of GPUs, step 2, ? Step 3, profit, September 4th, 2025.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Hey, Loren.
It was it was October that he said we're going to do data center satellites, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder whose idea it really was to do data centers in space. Was it Elon's, or was it someone else's? We'll never know.
Dun, dun, dun. Hey, Loren, just got a couple of minutes before we wrap up this hour. I mean, I'm looking at Rocket Lab down about 9.5%. Are there other names like we should be watching, or now at this point it's Elon's race to lose when it comes to space?
Yeah, I find that interesting, because the general theme,
they're not apples to apples, to be fair.
No, definitely not, but the general theme and consensus leading up to this IPO was that this was actually good for everybody in the space world. Yeah. I obviously took that with a little bit of a grain of salt, just because when it comes to competing with SpaceX, it's just been so difficult. I mean, look at Blue Origin, look at, and Blue Origin before that explosion was kind of poised to quote unquote beat SpaceX to the moon, because they were about to launch their own lander in the fall. I just don't think that time frame is happening. It was going to be an uncrewed lander, but still, like, SpaceX hasn't actually landed anything on the
they
moon.
Were getting very aggressive about it.
They were very aggressive about it, and it was very close to Jeff Bezos' heart because he's a moon guy. It's always been like Jeff Bezos, kind of the moon guy, Elon's the Mars guy. But when it comes to their New Glenn rocket being an actual competitor, they were just ramping up, and then look what happened. And then meanwhile, the other real option from a U.S. perspective is ULA's Vulcan rocket, also grounded because of issues, at least when it comes to the military. So it's just really hard to catch SpaceX on heavy lift launch specifically. Rocket Lab's in a different category with small launch, but they are building a new rocket to potentially compete with Falcon 9.
You are all things space. It's really cool stuff. Loren Grush, Bloomberg News global space reporter, usually in Texas. Glad to have her here, and always glad to have Ed Ludlow, normally in San Francisco. He's going to be sticking around as well, in and out, making appearances everywhere. Folks, we are heading to a break. SpaceX continuing to trade higher on its first public day.